welcome everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. You know, our very impressive guest today, Chris Westfall, is one of the most sought-after business coaches and keynote speakers in the world. He helped launch over 5 dozen businesses. 5 dozen. We're going to have to talk about that, Chris. And has appeared on ABC News, NBC TV, and CNN. Chris's new book, Easier, subtitled 60 Ways to Make Your Work Life Work for You, isn't all about taking the easy way out of difficult circumstances. It's about, and I'm loving this, we're going to talk about it, it's about overcoming tunnel vision, seeing things in a new way, and showing up differently when life's challenges arises. This book is actually filled with difficulty, just like life is. Westfall said in a recent interview, in the midst of difficult circumstances, difficult relationships, misunderstandings, communication challenges, a new path emerges, a new possibility emerges. And with that, we will chat about Chris today in our show that I've sort of titled Finding Meaning in Life Messes. I'm most interested in what Chris brings to the table regarding how we can better manage our life. With that, let's bring on our guest, Chris Westfall. Welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Very much looking for our time together. There's so much I want to talk to you about. So instead of doing, our sort of typical let's get to know each other, I want to jump right in. Are you ready to jump right in?
I am. Let's jump.
Yeah. This is not a deep leap, but it's an important leap. To begin our time, I want to start with this. You wrote, Managing Life's Issues is about overcoming tunnel vision, seeing things in a new way, and showing up differently when challenge arises. I think that is so important. I love these 3 actions of overcoming tunnel vision, seeing things in a new way, showing up differently. It seems that you're calling for, a real significant change entitled, It's All About Me, Life is Going to Go My Way mentality that we seem to have today. And you're saying, no, it doesn't work that way, but that doesn't mean your life has to be bad. There are things that you can do that can make it better. Talk to me about those 3 actions. I think they're really important.
Well, possibilities always exist inside of any circumstance. And when things are difficult is when we do have that tunnel vision, when it looks like there's only one way forward, and that way is blocked. It's like an athlete that comes to the coach. I mean, in any sport you choose, and the athlete comes to the coach and says, Coach, there's only one way to win. The coach would immediately say, sit down. Your job is to find every way to win. And we get lost in frustration, and that frustration causes tunnel vision, where it looks like the world is closing in around us. And part of the message of Easier is not only that it doesn't have to be like this, but that possibilities always exist. I mean, think about it. In this interview, how many possibilities exist for us to talk about? The answer is it's infinite. It's
infinite, yeah. Especially with your resume, it's infinite. There's so much we can talk about.
But we, inside of tough times, we think, it's there infinite possibilities. There's no way, and yet there is that way. And can we find a way to somehow zoom out? To see the bigger picture, to see beyond the tunnel vision, to see that one pathway is not the only solution. And that's a big part of making things easier.
And do you find it's common, tunnel vision is really common in our culture, that people fail to see the opportunity and the options that they may have because they're so singular focused and so tied down by the obstacle or challenge or whatever they're facing that it just looks like there's no hope, there's no opportunity. I mean, don't you find that a lot in your coaching?
I do. I find that tunnel vision is prevalent, it's universal, but here's the good news. The opposite of tunnel vision is also readily available. We all have the ability to innovate. We all have the ability to zoom out, to take a deep breath, to see things in a new way. That's not motivational nonsense. I'm talking about the resilience that's part of our human DNA. And
And we don't talk about enough about resilience, do we? I mean, because we are, and especially younger children. They're worried about children getting soccer trophies, participation trophies, but they don't realize that children don't need that, and it's actually not good for them. They are resilient, and they will figure out ways to overcome, and somehow we are talked out of that as we grow older.
And that resilience is built into our DNA. It's like 5 fingers on a hand. We are born to bounce back, and it's one of the things that's talked about, that I talk about in the book. And this viewpoint, it comes from science. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I quote people who are, and the scientists who discovered the human genome, our DNA, the double helix that makes up our DNA, were surprised at how uncomplicated it was. In other words, they felt that our DNA, when it was discovered, was somehow incomplete. And what they came to realize is that we, as human beings, are built to adapt. And as you know, if a child is not loved and held and nurtured and stuff like that, that child has an extraordinarily tough time growing up. But for children who are cared for, we learn to adapt because that's who we are as a human race. That's part of everyone's DNA. And so we do lose sight. We do lose sight of our human nature, and we find ourselves chasing soccer trophies instead of recognizing the power and the capacity that is inside all of us. It's built into the system. And we all have the ability to access tunnel vision, but we also have the ability to access moments of genius. And that's not to say that I am a genius or you are a genius. That's not what I'm saying. But we've all had those aha moments.
Those breakthrough moments, yeah.
That's right. You know what I'm talking about. And that's what we lose sight of, and we replace it with tunnel vision, or we're chasing trophies, or we're underestimating what children are capable of. It's just a simple misunderstanding. We have to look at the design, and we have to look at our nature, our human nature, to see that things can get easier.
That's interesting. And what is it about our human nature that makes things easier?
I think that it's so simple to look at waves hitting the shore or a flock of birds and go, that's absolutely perfect. We see the perfection in the design, in nature all around us. But we refuse to acknowledge, or we don't look at, or we lose sight of the design that is inside of all of us as human beings, which is not to say that I am perfect or you are perfect or anything like that, but there is a design that helps us to be resilient, that helps us to bounce back. As you mentioned in my introduction, easier is filled with difficulties. I mean, if you're going to write a book called Easier, you got to have some difficult things that people have to face and deal with.
Right.
And when we're in the middle of things, we get lost in tunnel vision and we think to ourselves, how am I going to get through this? And the message inside of Easier, and it's a message that I had to come to on my own accord, but it's a message that says, what happens when you shift from how am I going to get through this to what can I get from this? How can I see something good in the design? How can I recognize my own resilience, which isn't trying to pump myself up or believe in a pretty lie about myself. It's simply noticing and acknowledging and understanding that we are built to innovate. We fall into tunnel vision, but we're built for the opposite of that if we choose to access it.
It's almost as if you have to discover that on your own, isn't it? I mean, it's rarely is it taught. I mean, there's a few business management courses and few, psychological and self-development courses that will teach that. But for the most part, people are not taught that they are imaginative and that they can create new scenarios. It's instead of, and which I really can't wait till we talk about quitting later on. It's that we're always trying to make this thing that's not working better. We're not really applying our ability to think forward, to think creatively, to think, as you said, geniusly. It doesn't even occur because we're so caught up in the difficulties and messiness of life.
It's true. It's absolutely true. But it's also true. It is both and true that we have the ability to access creativity. And while it's true it's not taught, if you stop and think about it, human beings have been creating things for hundreds of thousands of years.
Oh, yeah.
Human beings are built to create. We create partnerships, we create relationships, we create problems in our own minds, we create tunnel vision. I mean, we create things. And it is, I think, perhaps a failure maybe in our educational system, but it's something that people can access just by reflecting on who they are. And just looking at the human condition, we are here to create. And so many times when life gets difficult is when we're managing stuff, trying to manage our partner's moods, we're trying to manage our calendars, and we're not creating. We don't recognize that what it is that we're managing is in the pursuit of creation, of creating something better for ourselves, for our families, for our loved ones, for the people at work that matter to us, whatever the case may be. I mean, that's just what it looks like, Charlie, is that we are creators and co-creators with the people around us. That, I think, is something that we do lose sight of.
Yeah, we lose sight of it, and then we can be discouraged about it because when we create something, we can be surrounded by non-creatives that are not ready to go down this new path, and we are chastised for our new path, and yet we are really on the forefront of what needs to be done. It's a personal and a cultural conundrum. I'm curious, when you talked about that we are resilient, that we have life difficulties, and that we can overcome those with imagination, with creativity. Is that I'm curious, Chris, did you discover that personally for Chris Westfall, or is it something you discovered from your clients?
The best answer I can give you is yes.
Of course, that's what I figured, but I thought I'd ask the question anyway.
The things that I'm sharing are based on my research, but also on the coaching that I've received and the coaching that I've done with my clients. And the book, this conversation, it's a reflection of the experiences that I have had. And in looking at the human condition, and as a human being, I qualify. So looking at my own, state of mind, I've come to see ways to access greater creativity and resilience and to tap into these things that we're talking about when I step outside of the misunderstandings that we all fall into, the tunnel vision that you're talking about, the I'm not creative myth. The other one that says, that's the way I've always done things.
Oh,
which that's some dangerous language right there.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Which means there's no chance for change. There's no chance for transformation. And again, that's just not how we're wired. We don't, we have all kinds of thoughts around change and resistance to change and that sort of thing, but we are built for it. And when we see that, and we see that in spite of our troubles and difficulties and the economic challenges and all the things that are going on, we're still standing. We're still standing. And that, in and of itself, to me, is evidence of our resilience. That's not just based on my personal experience, but that's the experience of every person I've ever met.
Do you have, I'm going to assume that you have models in your instruction, models of success and models of being stuck and models of being caught in that, what was that loop we talked about, caught in that tunnel vision and seeing things old ways and not showing up differently. Did you receive somewhere? Did you read it? Did you come up with it? Where did the ideas for easier come? I'm interested in the genesis of creativity. It has a lot to do with the experience that you have with other people, but I was speaking last night I had dinner with an extraordinary creative. This man is, I don't think I'm overstating when I say he's genius, and he has no idea he is, because it's like downloads. He gets these models in his brain, and his models are brilliant, Chris. I mean, he's a consultant, and his models are as good as any model I've caught in just about anything. But he says they're like downloads. He says he didn't even think they were his ideas, so he never thought he was that smart, because it would just come to him like from some divine source. And I don't want to talk about necessarily that it's a divine source, but do you find these models just come to you, or do you work them out, or do you just get this aha that says, oh my goodness, this will work, let me test it out on my population and see if that works? Is that sort of your process, or is it different than that?
It's a version of that. A couple of things that I would say, when I think about Easier is the book that I needed to write. It's the book that came through me. So I can certainly relate to what you're saying about your friend, of these things just show up and they just become expressed. And that was how Easier took shape for me. So I think that I can relate to having things come through me, and I think that things come through us all the time. Again, that's those moments of genius. When you just know how to figure something out, and I'm able to do that, and your friend's able to do that, not because we're superheroes, but because we all have that capacity. And to say more about where this book, its origins. This project really came from a deep personal loss that I faced personally, and it was when I lost my father, and it was in the early days of the pandemic, and he tested positive on a Monday, and by Friday he was gone.
Oh my goodness! I'm so sorry to hear that.
And, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And Charlie, he wasn't just my father; he was my friend, and we were very close. And this was in the days before vaccines and masks and all that stuff, and we were just caught off guard, and it was extremely difficult. I would find myself just doubled over, like I would be in traffic, just gripped with grief. I wouldn't be able to drive. I'm like, crying at a stoplight. I'm like, man, I got to get it together. I got to find a way out of this difficulty. What can I do to make this easier? What I discovered in the pit of my grief, which, by the way, it's still, my grief is still here, but it's, it changes over time.
Yeah, but it never goes away.
But it never goes away. But there is a way I found to show up differently, to honor my father's memory. And what showed up for me was being able to be at a stoplight and weeping and say, you know what, I'm okay with this. Because if I were to take action, if I could do something to make these tears go away and to stop this grief, you know what I have to stop? I have to stop the love that I have for my father.
Yes.
And I can't, and I won't, and I will never do that. And so, Charlie, what took shape for me was a willingness to embrace my humanity, my gifts and my flaws, the ups and the downs, the whole of it, and say, you know what, I'm okay with this. And as they say, grief is love persevering. And I embraced it. And I said, whatever shape my grief takes, you were mentioning models and stuff like that. I wasn't going to put a model on it. I wasn't going to say, well, it should be this and it can't be that. Can you imagine trying to tweak variances in your grief?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Oh.
And so I had to step into that, and I had to say, you know what? I'm okay with this. And I honor my father's memory because of the feelings that I had at the time, and I'm describing the feelings that I have right now. It's an honor to his memory, and I would never do anything to take those away. And so when we embrace our humanity, our human condition, when we embrace the messes, things get easier.
I'm silent because that's really making me thinking. It is so true. When we embrace the messiness, that is when clarity does begin to emerge. But until we embrace it, it is our enemy, and we are fighting it, trying to overcome it. When, if I understand you right, we're trying to work in harmony with it. We're trying to work with it and have it somehow help transform us into a better state. Did I catch that at all right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and it's not about trying to control that state.
Right.
It's about understanding how thought works. Because again, we are resilient, and thoughts change. They shift. They die down. And when we make what we're feeling okay, rather than a mood that needs to be managed or medicated or anything like that, we say, you know what, this is part of being human. I've lost my father. Of course, I'm going to feel a lot of feels. Of course I am. And can't I be okay with that? And if you're having difficulties at work, or you've got a tough relationship, things aren't going well with your spouse, whatever the case may be, you've got some thinking around that, I'm here to raise my hand and say, so do I. Because that's part of being human. And when we want to create real and lasting change, what we've got to stop doing is wrestling with who we are and start embracing it and saying, you know what, when events and things and circumstances happen and they don't go our way, we're going to have some thinking around that. We're going to have some frustration. We're going to have some challenges. That's part of being human. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you're a person, And from that place, when things are okay and we're not putting pressure on ourselves to be someone different than who we are, now things get easier. And now we can see things in a new way. And now we can make real and lasting transformation through insight and through understanding, not by trying to manage our circumstances or imagine if I tried to manage and control my grief. You might as well try to harness the wind. You can't do it.
I came across, I think this is going to apply to our conversation, but I came across a document every now and then. Do you every now and then look at what you find some document you wrote a decade ago and you read it and say, oh my goodness, first of all, a lot of times I wrote it. I read it and I say, who wrote that? That was not bad. And other times I just say, oh my goodness. But I turned 70 in 2020. So I wrote this in 2011, and I said 2011, 9 years to go. And so I was sort of saying, what did I want to do in the next 9 years? Who did I want to become? And it was not a goal setting that I want to achieve this career or this amount of money or this particular fame or whatever, but they were very values oriented and what I wanted to look like. I had not looked at that list in a decade. I had not, it wasn't something I checked off on a regular basis. I just wrote it one day, and I looked at it, and I showed it to my wife just a couple of days ago, and we were both shocked at how my life almost is identical with what I want it to be. Because it came from, I think, Chris, because it came from the core of me, and there's something in the core of us that is telling us who we want to be, who we can be, and what is important in life, apart from making money and getting this new job or, becoming a trophy winner. But how you treat people, how you treat life, how you view life, what's important. And I was wondering, are you an advocate of that kind of planning?
I'm an advocate of that kind of exercise, I think that kind of planning can be a little slippery, and I'll tell you why. Is for someone hearing that, and they put down a 10-year plan. What if they don't take the same approach as you do, and they're checking in and they're saying, well, and they treat it like a checklist. I should be here, I should be there, right? And that makes things difficult, because sometimes people go, well, I've got a stopwatch on success. And not only do I have a stopwatch on success, but I know exactly when success is going to show up, which is right next door to I can predict the future. False. It's a misunderstanding. But we fall into that trap all the time. I think what you went through is what you're describing, and what I hear, Charlie, is I sat down and I expressed my values, and I looked into the crystal ball, into the future, and said, here's how I think these values are going to express themselves. And what you wrote down was your truth. And, 10 years later, you're living it. So I think from that standpoint, it's really, really a good and valuable exercise. But when people put timelines on where I should be 10 years from now, source of frustration, right?
They're typically arrival points rather than journey points. I think.
Correct.
I think a lot of mine was a journey point. It wasn't an arrival point. It was a continuing journey, that I'm continuing on this journey and pursuing this and continuing to pursue something, rather than saying, I am going to be, I'm going to be a podcast host in 2023. It wasn't even in the list. I didn't even know about podcasts in 2011, for me personally.
Sure.
What I want to do is, I really want to get into something that I am finding very interesting in your writing, and I think because it's going to be a little bit of a content shift, probably it's a bit early, but I think now might be a good time for us to take a break, and then I want to go into this context shift. Is that a context shift? Is that okay with you?
Sounds perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and I have a very special guest, executive life business coach and keynote speaker Chris Westfall, who has written a wonderful book titled Easier, 60 Ways to Make Your Work Life work for you. And we're talking about messiness, and we've been talking about how we anticipate the life to come. And there is something Chris wrote that sort of not necessarily, it's not a subject change, but it's a context or content change. And I want to start this way, Chris. We have such a stigma. I think it's probably pretty international, but certainly Western and certainly American. We have this stigma against the idea of quitting. And you have written that winners know when to quit. I'm so glad you wrote that, because people don't talk about that. And I'm wondering, when you talk about winners know when to quit, what you had in mind when you said that?
Winners quit doing the things that don't serve them. Winners quit doing the things that are not useful. Winners do consistently what other people do only occasionally. And they quit being inconsistent. And that's what helps them to access discipline. I'm not speaking of winners in general, but you can think of any successful person or the successes that you've enjoyed in your life. When we say yes to something, we have to say no to something else.
Right.
It's possible. You can't do two things at once. You can't. You can't fish and ride a bicycle. You can't play the piano and play baseball at the same time. You can't do it.
Unless you're trolling with a fishing rod on your bicycle.
I should know better than to use metaphors with you. You know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying. It just came, it was one of those ones that came to my brain, and I had to say it.
But winners quit all the time. They quit things that don't serve them, and part of what looks like success to me is having the courage, the honesty to say no to the things that are not helping to move your life forward. And that's a big part of the coaching conversation, is to not just to point out those things, but to provide some encouragement so that you can say no, so that quitting isn't something that has all these kind of connotations around. Oh, you can't quit. You got to stick it out. The whole premise of the book is the book starts with a guy who's frustrated in his job and he wants to quit. He wants to quit, and he hires a coach to help him find the courage to do so. Little does he know, he's about to be fired in about 5 days. So from this kind of, life after career death story emerges a message that quitting looks like on the surface. It's a bad thing. You can't quit. You can't say no. You can't walk away. And then he ends up getting fired, which is another bad thing. Oh my God, this is a bad thing. Guess what? It turns out to be completely different than the way that the character's imagining it. That quitting and seeing things in a different way is really at the heart of the book. And if you're in a situation, a circumstance, a relationship that you know you need to say no to so that you can say yes to something else, finding that courage, finding the guts, finding the strength to do what you know needs to be done. It looks like it's difficult, but it actually might just make things easier. And as they say, it's never tougher than it is in your mind.
And most of us have such a negative self-image that we're afraid if we quit, we're either, it's the FOMO, we're going to miss out on something,
right,
or we are going to damage our reputation, or I don't know what I'm going to do next. I've got to have all these things under control, and there's times when quitting, typically it's good to quit and have some sort of little plan to back you up so you can start working on it. But even if you don't, sometimes quitting is the best thing. If it's damaging your psyche, if it's damaging your relationships, then it's not healthy for you. It's not good for you. And it is time to quit, and we have plenty of time in our life to experience. Chris, I've probably had 7 careers mostly because I just don't have the capability of lasting more than a decade at anything. I've got to go on to something new. Even when I'm in the midst of oncoming success, I say, nah, it doesn't make a difference. I need to do something different. But I'm really an advocate. I'm an advocate of hanging in there when times are tough. And
sure,
there's a difference between things not working for me and just tough times. And I have to hang in the tough times. But after a number of series of tough times, then we do have to look at that and say, is there something going on here that's telling me I need to do something different? And even though I'm not sure what that is, I need to do something different. Winners seem to know when to do this.
Absolutely. But Charlie, what you're talking about, I would call it healthy quitting. And I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but, you're talking about, especially if you're talking about quitting a relationship or a job or whatever it is that you're doing it in a way that is healthy, positive, not harmful to others or to yourself. That's healthy quitting. if I quit eating birthday cake, that's healthy quitting.
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about. And when you say, when you were just talking about changing and making a shift every 10 years, I say, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with healthy quitting? And it's the cousin of happy wanting. It's wanting something, wanting a change for yourself, not from a place of desperation, but from a place of exploration. You want to see what it's like. I've done that myself. Many, many times. And I think that's, I would just challenge anyone who says, no, you can't quit. You got to, certainly there are things where commitment needs to matter. There are times when discipline needs to show up so that you can move through tough times. And you certainly don't want to, you don't want to quit your job because somebody looks sideways at you or something like that. That's not what we're talking about. That's not healthy quitting. That might be overreacting. That's what that might be. But healthy quitting is about moving towards the thing that serves you, that thing that you're curious about, and that curiosity. That's what I love about the way that you approach this interview is you always bring such curiosity to it, and I try to bring that to my life too. And I wonder if the folks who are listening to us wonder what that curiosity might bring to them, combined with some healthy quitting. What is it that you can say no to so that you might say yes to a curiosity and explore? Because I tell you, I talk to my clients about this, and I think I talk about it a little bit in the book. What happens if you approach life almost like a scientist, where you are experimenting? And a scientist knows what you and I often forget, and that is that every experiment is a positive result. Meaning, even if the experiment fails or the hypothesis is wrong, the scientist is more informed.
Right.
The scientist is more informed. So what's wrong with some healthy quitting? What's wrong with pursuing a curiosity? What's wrong if you consider your life or a piece of your life as an experiment? Nothing more, nothing less. No pressure on yourself. Explore. See what happens. That, to me, makes things easier.
I like what you said earlier on. I didn't write it down, but it was something like, there's healthy quitting, but there's also healthy wanting. Did you say healthy wanting?
Yeah, it's happy wanting.
Happy wanting. I like that idea, to identify what your wanting is and what makes you happy. And we will talk about the ego just next. That's not ego-centered, but that is somewhat ego-centered. We've got to satisfy our ego. But it's a service-oriented that we're helping other people. When we're helping other people, then that is a happy wanting, making life better for someone else.
It's the opposite of neediness or desperation or any of those sort of negative connotations. If you're happy, but you have, from a place of contentment, of course, we still have desires. We don't have to be in pain or hurting to want new things for ourselves. That's happy wanting.
I like that. Let me tell you, I'm going way off track here, and I had it's on track, but it's off my notes. I just had sort of, I don't want to call it an epiphany, but I just had this thought, and it was only yesterday that I had this thought. Now, I'm a Europhile. I love to travel. I just spent almost a month in Portugal, and I go to Uganda 2 to 3 times a year for 2 to 3 weeks, and I see different things. And I thought, now I'm married, and my wife just loves her job. She's an executive coach, and she does an incredible job. She's extraordinarily successful in Orange County. And I just thought about, I think if it were up to me, I would probably just sell everything, pack everything up, and move maybe to Portugal, maybe, and not necessarily intend to spend my rest of my life there, but 2 or 3 years there, because it's sort of, I want to see what shows up. I just want to experience what shows up when I completely quit doing what I'm doing right now and have a whole new experience. Now, do you think that's pathological, or do you think that's just the sign of a creative, curious person?
I think that sounds like freedom to me, is what that sounds like. And yes, it sounds very creative. Pathological? I don't know. I mean, would you repetitively move to portrait? I don't know.
No. I wouldn't. No.
I mean, I think it's a one-time. I mean, it would be something that you would go and you would experience. I think to me, I mean, there's two words that show up when you talk about Portugal like that, and here they are. Why not? It sounds great.
Yeah, well, the why not is my wife is not ready to leave her career, and she doesn't let me out of the house more than a month at a time. So, well, at least I get out of the house a month at a time. I can be my creative self all over the world, a month at a time. I'm very lucky. You also wrote, and I think this has a lot to do with sort of laying the groundwork for that creativity and that change and that quitting, and you wrote this, obligations are obligations, duties are still duties, deadlines are still deadlines, and the sharks are still the sharks. But when you show up differently, the conversation can change. I really like that, Chris. I like that, life still goes on, but it's up to me to show up differently. It's not up to wait for the circumstances to change. It's a Viktor Frankl thing. It's not for the circumstance to change, but for my attitude to change.
Right. And what Frankl talks about is that inside of any circumstance, we always have the freedom to choose how we show up, how we respond, how we react. Circumstances are beyond our control. That is just how life works. But how we respond to our circumstances and how we show up, that to me looks like something that we can influence on a daily basis, on a moment-to-moment basis. One of the things that I've discovered is that in the face of deadlines and obligations, I can change my relationship with deadlines. I mean, I can start by saying, oh my God, I got a deadline. How am I going to hit this thing? This is just a nightmare, blah, blah, blah. And I can start making up a story that's sort of a horror film in my mind. Right?
Yeah.
But the coaching question that's asked and easier, and the question that I have to ask myself, is who would I be without that story? What would I do without burning cycles on, creating the scary music and monsters and all the, the things that I need to worry about before the deadline? Who would I be without that story? Well, who I'd be is someone taking action, someone finding resources. If I couldn't hit the deadline by myself, to find people that could help me, to zoom out, to take it. It's the opposite of tunnel vision. I gotta have the opposite of tunnel vision, and I can't do that if I'm lost in a story, especially if that story is an elaborately crafted horror movie, which by the way, we all fall into those stories. We all get lost in thought. It's part of human nature as well. But when we see that we are not our thoughts, when we see that we've got some thinking going on around our circumstances, and when we come to that understanding, it opens up new possibilities. And here's the thing, just because a train of thought shows up doesn't mean you have to ride that train. And it is possible that deadline is going to be missed, that deadline is a nightmare. It's also possible that you're going to hit the deadline. It's also possible that you could call other resources. It's also possible that you could find a new way of going about doing things, but not if you're lost in thought. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. As a matter of fact, Chris, it was in my notes. Understand that we are not our thoughts, and that we can make, as you and I talked before, and you had said, we can make challenging events or issues even worse by thinking our way deep into the challenge. and not into the solution, not into the creative opportunity. And we believe that negative thought about ourselves. And it's so easy to understand because, we've been told that. We've been told it by parents, by bosses, by teachers, that, so many of us have been told that of what we lack, and that becomes a thought pattern that sort of dictates the way we think about ourselves, and that needs to be reversed. And you're challenging us in your book and in this conversation on the podcast, you're challenging us to think differently. You suggested to slow down, zoom out, and recognize that you don't have to do it all alone. That right, Sarah, just those three things are probably worth a show. To slow down, take a big picture view, and recognize this is a relational, life is a relational program.
No doubt. And recognize that you have the ability to ignore your thoughts. Just because a thought shows up doesn't mean you have to engage with it. I mean, it's like this. It's like the story of the two guys that come up to a mountain. And the first guy says, man, look at that mountain. That thing's gorgeous. I can't wait to hike that mountain. And the second guy says, man, look at that mountain. I'll never get over that mountain. I want to go back home and watch Netflix. and my question is the mountain a good thing or a bad thing? Is the mountain something to be hiked or is it something to be avoided? And the answer, Charlie, is it's just a mountain. But it's our thinking around the mountain that means we're either going to hike it or we're going to go buy a bag of Cheetos and watch some Netflix. And no judgment on either one of those outcomes.
As I say, either choice, oddly enough, I mean, it's not normally our response, but either choice is legitimate. There's not necessarily a value on that.
But the mountain's neutral.
The mountain is neutral, yes.
The mountain is neutral. And that's the thing. If circumstances, if we aren't able to get to neutral, it's really hard to accelerate.
How do we accelerate that, getting to neutral? How do we accelerate saying, okay, look, if this is just a thought, Charlie, you need to be a bit more open and think a little bit more out of the box. How do we get to that point, Chris? I mean, that's, we're so ingrained with this linear and limited thinking.
Right. And we walk through life, this is good, that's bad, and we play a game in life of not it. That's not for me, not that, I can't do that, that should be different. And we walk through life passing judgment on the ifs, ands, and buts all around us. And that's part of human nature. That's part of my nature. But it is possible from a place of understanding to see that there's something beyond the labels. The mountain is neither a good thing nor a bad thing. And I'm not trying to say anything other than recognizing that possibilities exist beyond the labels and the pre-assignments that we've many times been given by the way that we were raised or whatever the case may be, the tunnel vision that people, well-intentioned people, gave to us. I had this in my life.
Oh, yeah, and and it's out of a good heart. They're trying to protect us. They're trying to tell us this is the way things work, but they don't work that way. But their goal is to help us, to protect us.
But see, that's why I say, in the spirit of invitation, is there an experiment that you could run, like a scientist, to answer this 3-word question? Is that true? And I'm not trying to suggest that you should try doing dangerous things just to see if it's really something you should be protected from. But I'm talking about, like what you were talking about, going to see Portugal. I'm sure at some point in your life that was impossible. That was unimaginable.
Yeah.
And yet here we are. And the only way that you can have those experiences is to explore. And if you had a label that says, I'll never go to Europe, or, flying over the Atlantic, that's dangerous, you should never do that. I mean, whatever that might be, the only characterization that I want to give to that is to simply say that's just a thought. That's nothing more and nothing less than a thought. And when we see beyond our thinking, we come to an understanding to recognize that thoughts come and go. And sometimes we turn our thoughts into things, and those things become scary movies and things to be avoided and things that we'll never try. Well, that's not an exploration of possibility. And if you're wondering why you're experiencing tunnel vision, maybe look at that. Maybe look at what is it in your thinking that is shaping your reality. Because it's, as Shakespeare said, there is nothing either good nor bad in this world, Horatio, but our thinking makes it so.
Love that. So let's close with this question, or with this comment and question, and I always close with not so short answers.
Okay.
Meaning, as I've read your work and talked to you now, meaning in messiness, finding meaning in messiness, really simply means it's finding meaning in real life, doesn't it? Because real life is messy.
Real life is messy.
And it's how do we deal with the messinesses, the challenges? How do we deal with that so we can live a life that's a full life?
I think finding that full life is about saying yes. I'm going to say it, Charlie, saying yes to the mess. We have to make it okay, the messiness, the complications. And we have to see that inside the complications, inside the difficult relationships, inside the hopes and dreams that never came to life, we're going to have some thinking around that.
Oh.
Do you see where I'm going with that?
Oh, I see exactly where you're going, because I'm thinking of relationships, and I'm thinking of certain situations that when I embrace the messiness without to the degree that I can, without value judgment, and I'm just looking at it as a quasi-neutral situation, there's so much I can learn from it. But if I have all the baggage around it, then I have a difficult time making sense of it. But real life is messy, and messy is nothing but what happens normally, and it's an opportunity to make it better.
That's right. And if circumstances are difficult, ask a simple question. What else could this mean? If you've got a story that's making a circumstance or a relationship difficult, what else could this mean? Or what else could this be? This points in the direction of possibility, because when we can say yes to possibility, and when we can acknowledge that other possibilities always exist, even when we don't see them, but they're there. They're there. They're waiting to be discovered. And that discovery, I think, is at the heart of that fulfillment that you were talking about. And personal freedom is not a destination; it's a journey. It's a journey of discovery, and that discovery of that, as near as I can tell, that fulfillment, that personal freedom, it comes from embracing the mess and saying, "What else could this be? What else could this mean? And how can I, in the midst of this mess, express my values? How can I create something for myself, for the people that I care about? And how can I drop the story? Drop the story that I'm creating inside my mind. We all do it."
I love the idea of freedom. Freedom is my number one value in life, and
yeah.
I think that's so clear. So so critical that you're saying. Well, I'll tell you what, this has been an exciting time. This has been really a learning time. And it's been sort of a different show for me. I don't know how to articulate how it's different, but it's been a different show, and it's been a very fun show. It's been a very interesting show for me, and I want to thank you so much for being willing to play the Charlie game. You've been a good participant.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for your insights and for your curiosity. I appreciate you, and I'm grateful for the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. How do you want listeners to? Do you want them to go to your website? What do you want? How do you want to have listeners get a hold of you or find out more about you?
Sure. Well, folks can find me across all social media channels at Westfall Online, and that's also my website, westfallonline.com. And Charlie, I don't normally do this, but for your listeners, if folks are interested in exploring some of the things that we've talked about here today on a personal level, professional level, I have a contact button on my website, and you can set up a 30-minute conversation there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'd be happy to offer that. So if folks want to, and there's no charge for it, you just come in and we can talk via phone, or we can meet up via Zoom. And the only thing that I ask is just that you come to it in the spirit of coaching, which is in the spirit of service, to find something in your life that's missing, sort of that happy wanting that we were talking about. And that's the spirit of discovery that the website offers. So if people are interested, I'd be happy to chat with people personally.
Well, I may call you. I've always had a coach. I mean, I've had a coach like forever, and I just finished my term with a coach. And I don't think I've had a male coach. I've had, in the last decade, I've had 3 female coaches, which has been very interesting. But I am a strong believer in coaching, and I want to encourage our listeners to take advantage and see what you can learn personally from someone as skilled as Chris Westfall. Thank you once again, Chris, for being on the show. You've been great.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Well, everybody, that's all for today. This is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.